We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisades Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is Chris Grove, President and Director of Commerce Resources. How are you today, Chris?
Yeah, really good, Tom. Good to talk to you again. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's great to have you back. And, it's never a bad thing to kind of remind our audience about the importance of rare earth elements, which is obviously what we're going to kind of center today's discussion around. So, maybe for those that aren't familiar, why don't you give us a little bit of a rundown, if you could, of what prices for rare earth elements have done in the last couple months here, or maybe even the last couple of years, just to show our listeners, what the characteristics of some of these metals are.
Sure, absolutely. And one of the fundamentals I would like to mention, Tom, is basically continued increased global demand against major issues on the supply side. Mm-hmm. My personal experience with rare earth elements, as I probably previously said, goes back to 2005. When China imposed an export duty on rare earth elements, which was later in 2011, 2012 declared illegal by the WTO. They're really fast moving, that WTO, and only, took them 6-7 years to declare that illegal. But rare earth element prices have basically doubled again in the last 2 years thereabouts. And the point I wanted to make about continued increased global demand against major issues on the supply side, in 17 years, there's only one new commercially significant producer of rare earth elements on planet Earth, and that's the Australian company Lynas. And, they were loaned $260 million originally by the Japanese to essentially address some processing issues. But they were able to do that, and they are a significant commercial producer today. So all credit due to them. But the bottom line is that the global demand for rare earth elements in the last decade has more than doubled. And if you factor in Lynas's production in that doubling of the global market, they're only a third, or they're currently about a sixth of global demand. So, in say 2011, global demand was somewhere between 120, 140,000 tons of rare earth elements per annum. It's north of 250, 260,000 tons per annum right now. And Lynas's production is only 40,000 tons. So there's that significant, whatever you want to calculate it, 80,000 tons of demand that has arguably been squeezing other supply. I don't know if you want me to share my screen to show you the chart I just got today from Buy Info, which is the service that we subscribe to out of Beijing. But can you see that?
That'd be great. Yep.
Okay, so they're usually like a week late in terms of the dating of the charts, but this is the rare earth industry weighted average on July 28th, 2022. And the prices for some of the magnet feed have just turned a little corner here, you can see here. But look where in general the trajectory is. I mean, in July of 2020, average prices were down at $210 per kilo. And now they're at $454 per kilo. If this was a gold chart, that would mean gold prices at a minimum of, say, $3,600 an ounce. And everybody would be going berserk with that kind of good news. But, in the rare earth element sector, this hasn't probably gotten as much respect as it warrants, really. So we're very conscious of this continued upward trajectory of rare earth element prices, and especially for the magnet feeds. So, there are 4 rare earth elements that are essential to make to manufacture a permanent magnet, and those are the ones that have doubled or tripled in the last decade.
So, Chris, just remind us of how critical these rare earth elements are to the industry, to all of these high tech applications, and what products are manufactured with these rare earth elements?
It's just a huge list of products where rare earth elements are essential. And rare earth elements, again, are a group of 17 different metals, and each one of, or many of them, have very specific uses. Like europium, for example, a decade ago used to be essential for phosphors, which is lighting. The first industrial use of rare earth elements was in lighting, or phosphors. And there was a very interesting and short transitional period between whale oil being used to light street lamps, to then oil from the ground being used to light street lamps, to then rare earth elements, predominantly europium, used in street lamps. And so the company that originally figured out how to use rare earth elements was this Austrian company called Treibacher. And in something like 1920, they sold apparently 3 billion units of street lamps with rare earth elements, basically providing the lighting source. And so you think about a city like Paris, City of Lights, those are rare earth element lights, or historically were. However, europium is not essential for phosphors now, but it is essential for missile guidance systems. And so you have a whole list of rare earth elements that are used in very specific things, like germanium is used for night vision goggles, et cetera, et cetera. But the market generally is dominated in terms of value and importance, I would suggest, with the magnet-making rare earth elements. And those are neodymium, praseodymium, terbium, and dysprosium. And magnets are everywhere. I mean, like literally, in the Dyson hand dryer in the washroom is powered by rare earth element magnets chasing each other. And that's the principle that Nikola Tesla talked about 100 years ago. Rare earth element magnets chasing each other. And so it's from an electric toothbrush, or a leaf blower, or your Tesla, or your Polaris, or your Leaf, or your Volt, or your Bolt. All of those cars, all of the electric vehicles need rare earth elements in all of their motors, whether it's the small motors moving your seat back and forth, your window up and down, your windshield wipers, or your drive motor. And, Tesla was really the holdout in terms of EV manufacturers. They only switched over to a DC permanent rare earth element magnet motor in 2018. But they aren't going back. In actual fact, Tesla is very interested in rare earth elements at this point in time. And that's all I should probably say about that now. But at any rate, did that answer your question?
Absolutely, Chris. So, you mentioned this basically the supply deficit equation there that exists in these markets. How does that play out towards the end of the decade? Does demand, is it just projected to just keep growing while supply seems somewhat static at this point?
The demand is expected to increase significantly, and I would suggest some of the best indicators are EV sales in 2020 and 2021. And you can see in the last couple of quarters of 2021, EV sales going absolutely parabolic. Now you look at 2022, you look at prices at the pump for gasoline, ridiculously high. I mean, we were driving back into town just last night, and my wife said, "Oh, look at gas is only, $1.91 per liter right now." It's like high fives. Oh, that's awesome. $1.91 per liter. It's only going to cost me, I don't know, $80 to fill up my gas tank. What I would suggest is that 2022 will be absolutely the high watermark for EV sales, or people ordering EVs, which they can't get at this point in time because the waiting list is so long. So yes, we believe the demand curve for rare earth elements will continue to increase, or the overall demand will continue to increase. And then on the supply side, yes, there are many late stage projects, but at the end of the day, there are so many other fundamentals that are important to consider when you look at rare earth elements that, the world will need the estimate, and this doesn't come from me, it comes from arguably the best independent and analyst on rare earth elements. And he has opined that the world needs 4 to 5 new producers the size of Linus, i.e. being able to produce 40,000 tons thereabouts per annum before the end of the decade to satisfy the continued increased demand.
So kind of to summarize that, it's just a major supply demand imbalance that is only widening, right?
Exactly right. And the other side, without specifically trying to criticize anybody, but one of the fundamentals that a lot of people are not aware of is that somewhere less than 20% of global world production of rare earth elements has historically come from a style of production that even the Chinese say they don't do anymore. And I trust them on that, which is the heap leaching of ionic clay deposits. And so you typically only find that kind of operation now in third world countries. And there are many countries that have said, absolutely not. You cannot do that style, like Madagascar. Madagascar has turned down a Chinese company because it was like, we were going to heap leach with acid here. And they were like, hell no. Am I allowed to say that? And so other third world countries are doing that ionic clay production, but that percentage is not growing. In actual fact, China and their South China ionic clays, which historically were the dominant producer of heavy rare earth elements, but they were heap leached with acid basically in the south of China. They have outlawed that now, but like literally across a negligible border, that's where that production is. There's a significant amount of that production in northern Myanmar, where there is basically no border between Myanmar and China. And I've seen the photographs of they have a little swinging gate, literally a little swinging metal gate between Myanmar and China. And just south of that gate is where the Myanmarese are doing these heap leaching projects on ionic clay deposits.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, the last time we spoke, we were talking about the kind of stranglehold that China has on the rare earth element kind of industry. So, we've kind of seen another factor come in and kind of constrain supply here. So how has the conflict in Ukraine affected the industry? As I understand it, only one of the processors in the EU, being Neo Performance, has primarily been dependent on feedstock from a Russian company. So how has that affected the industry as well?
Well, we're very friendly with Neo Performance, and we appreciate that they're in a very tough spot right now. I don't know, I wouldn't have a figure at hand of how much production Neo puts on the market generally. But yes, their dominant source of supply has historically been this Russian company called Solikamsk. And I would assume that material is not available to them right now, considering that Neo's facilities are in Estonia and Estonia is in the EU. In terms of the first part of your question, China's dominance, China is much less dominant in the production of feed, but they still are very dominant downstream in the processing from rare earth elements. However, I would very much like to make mention, if I haven't already, of the UK-based company just outside of Liverpool, which is called Less Common Metals. And Less Common Metals are interesting for a couple of reasons. One, Less Common Metals was the recipient of European Union capital in 2018 when the UK was deep in the throes of Brexit, and Less Common Metals received a grant of 18 million euros from this European Union fund called Horizon 2020. And the capital allowed then Less Common Metals to build out their facility and to achieve metallization. And so Less Common Metals is the first commercially significant rare earth element metallization facility on planet Earth. And there are a couple of small ones, one in Vietnam, et cetera, but Less Common are more, have a greater capacity and are very significant. So in terms of why that's important, say, for example, Commerce Resources produces a rare earth element concentrate. Mm-hmm. Our rare earth element concentrate is arguably the most attractive, and the ideal input feedstock for a processor like Neo Performance Materials. Then Neo Performance Materials in the European Union processes our concentrate through to the separated oxides that a company that less common would see as ideal input feedstock, and then less common from those separated oxides would produce rare earth element metal. So they would produce neodymium, praseodymium, terbium, dysprosium metal, and then those metals would be the ideal input feedstock for, say, a European Union magnet manufacturer like Vacuum Schmelze, or an American magnet manufacturer like Urban Mining in Texas. So there is this stratification in terms of the downstream processing of rare earth elements. And so far as yet, China is still dominant. But it would be also very, very accurate and fair to say there's a huge amount of activity outside of China in essentially supplanting, replacing those downstream processing aspects that China currently dominates.
So, Chris, are there any of those processors that are, let's say, equivalent to or that do the same process that Less Common does within North America?
At this point in time, not as far as I know. No metallization, as far as I know, occurs in North America. I believe Less Common is in conversation with large rare earth element companies in North America. But I don't know more than that. That's it. Mm-hmm. But that does make sense. As has been explained to me by the CEO of Less Common, metallization is a bit of an art form over that of just pure science. And he said it did take them a significant amount of effort to really figure out how to make rare earth element metal, but they did it. They achieved it. And I think they have first achieved it in like October of 2020. So I'm assuming that they continue to progress on that.
So, Chris, do you see the industry gaining support from federal governments? You mentioned to me before we started recording here the new federal Canadian budget and the $3.5 billion that has been put forward for the development of critical mineral projects and infrastructure. So talk to us a little bit about how, let's say, maybe the attitude of federal governments are changing towards these critical minerals.
Absolutely, and happy to. Trudeau has, he's got his critics, no question about it. But in 2016, the federal government announced a rare earth element optimization program that had a relatively small budget of about, $18 million towards rare earth elements for the next 5 years. That budget was increased just prior to the federal election last September to $58 million for the next 2 years. This program is operated under NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, and specifically worked on by CanMet Mining. And it essentially is a program where, like my company, Commerce Resources, doesn't get direct capital, but different metallurgical facilities like Kingston Process Metallurgy, Queen's University, NRCan themselves, SGS, et cetera, all can apply for the capital to do then specific optimization tasks for rare earth element projects. And we very happily have been a very significant beneficiary of this program for the last couple of years. And recently we sent NRCan another 2 tons of ashram rock so that they can do more optimization work on our material. That's the background. So then you get to the new federal budget of $3.5 billion for critical minerals projects. And not long after that budget was released, I was in Montreal. I was coming back from our most recent meeting with the 2 Inuit corporations with whom we have a letter of intent. And I was in the Montreal airport. My flight was delayed for 5 hours. And right when the flight was finally starting to board, a gentleman walked up to my right-hand side, but he couldn't actually go around me. There was like a pillar in the way. And I was waiting in my lineup to, board in group 2. And I thought, this guy's sending off the vibe that he's important. And but he can't get around me no matter what. And so then I look at his boarding pass, and it's like group 1, and his seat is 1D. And I was like, well, maybe he is important. And so we're all masked up. and I look over to him and I think to myself, sorry about the phone ringing there. And I look at him in his mask, and I ask him, "Are you Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of Natural Resources?" And he goes, "Yes, I am." And I think first thing, he's taller in real life than his pictures make him look. Secondly, he is my candidate in North Vancouver. And I said, "I voted for you twice, and I thought you did a good job at the DFO. And I'm really excited about you being the Minister for Natural Resources and to find out how the government is going to deploy this $3.5 billion." And he goes, "Well, here's my assistant, we exchange cards." I gave Minister Wilkinson a presentation on commerce resources. And from that, we had a Zoom call with his people at his ministry. And we were told that for $2 billion of the $3.5 billion, so far as yet, the programs were not developed. And historically, when the government apportions budget for something, that has come from perception of need, and then a program is developed, and then that ministry applies for budget. For $2 billion of this critical minerals budget, there are no programs yet, or the programs are being worked on, to be fair. The $1.5 billion that there was already a program for is for the infrastructure building for critical minerals project. And the people at NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, then introduced me to the people in charge of that program at Transport Canada. And so we had a very positive first call with Transport Canada about a month ago. And as I mentioned, they have the responsibility for deploying this $1.5 billion for infrastructure building for critical minerals projects. So the other $2 billion, or the programs for the other $2 billion, are being worked on right now. And we had a second call with NRCan, or the people at NRCan, last week sometime. And so things do seem to be moving positively. But in general, I would say the government right now is very focused on the opportunity of being the producer of feedstock to ultimately the world's largest market of rare earth elements, which is the United States, or I should say the world's largest market of rare earth element dependent products, which is the United States. So I think hopefully we're going to hear a lot more from the government over the next 3 months, 6 months, at how this capital is going to be deployed.
So, Chris, considering that you're in touch with so many of these other companies around the world, do you get the sense that you just told us about the happenings and the new developments within Canada? Is the entire sector, does it seem to be developing at that pace throughout the world as well?
Well, I don't want to be critical on that, but Australia right now is really, really active in terms of showing support by direct loans for rare earth element projects, much more significantly than Canada is doing. And I don't want to be critical, but a recent Australian company received a loan of $1.2 billion to build up their project. So far as yet, no project in Canada, as far as I know, have received any direct investment from the Canadian government. So would that be interesting? Absolutely would be interesting. Is Canada maybe losing out to Australian projects at this time? Possibly. Other countries like the European Union's fund I mentioned a minute ago, Horizon 2020, that's basically been replaced by what's called the European Raw Materials Association, or IRMA. And IRMA has something like 200 billion euros to advance critical rare earth element projects, essentially. However, after spending about a week filling out all of the forms for IRMA, we were then informed that IRMA couldn't invest directly into a Canadian company. It was like, great. You could have told me that at the beginning. But the reality is that a company like Less Common Metals, for example, could theoretically, if Commerce Resources decided to, put some processing facility in Liverpool, that doesn't make sense because they're not in the European Union anymore. If Commerce Resources decided to construct a processing facility in, I don't know, France, then maybe we could get some of that IRMA capital. But And as attractive as that idea sounds, I'll have to look into that further. Anyways, but a lot of countries are very active. The United States government, so far as yet, the DoD and the DOE have made direct investments into companies. The DoD made an investment of $35 million into MP Materials. More recently, I think the DoD gave I think it's a grant of $120 million to the Australian company Linus to set up some kind of processing facility in Texas. So yeah, there are a lot of governments deploying direct capital, and I think Canada arguably could do more.
Mm-hmm. So Chris, how do these deposits vary around the world? Are there, higher percentages of more valuable metals in certain deposits versus others?
Oh, absolutely. Every rare earth element deposit is different. And, and rare earth elements are more complicated because it isn't one commodity. It's 17 different commodities. So historically, in the gold world, arguably, grade is basically always king. I mean, there may be some issues related to a certain gold deposit in terms of extraction and processing, but I'm really not, a gold bug. So I'm just theorizing on that side. But rare earth elements, grade really is not king. Geology and mineralogy are the most important factors. And then if you have the right geology and the right mineralogy, that's when you get into the area of where, okay, now grade is important, and then tonnage is also important. And so, the deposits vary widely, let's put it that way. The industry itself is more focused than ever before on monazite-hosted rare earth element deposits, and that includes monazite sand deposits. And that's fine. And there are a couple of ways of processing rare earth elements, and some of them work across the board for monazite-hosted deposits. But in general, monazite is the most attractive mineral because it has more of the 4 rare earth elements that are used in magnet manufacturing. So there's many questions that an investor or anyone looking at a rare earth element deposit can ask themselves. But, mineralogy, geology, those are key fundamentals to understand. And then thirdly, distribution. And so our deposit, for example, has a very high distribution of those 4 rare earth elements used in magnet manufacturing, and we're monazite dominant.
So Chris, what's let's say the biggest obstacle for rare earth element, maybe producers or juniors in that way? Is it just the ability to get a permit in some of these jurisdictions, considering, let's say, the historic way that they have of processing and concentrating that ore?
No, I wouldn't say permits are generally the major issue. The proof of economic processing is really the biggest issue, and then secondly would be availability of capital. In general, this is a very expensive business, and rare earth elements have been seen by investors as guilty of destroying a lot of capital. Let's put it that way. And then there are complexities in terms of assessing the quality of a rare earth element deposit that are so important over and above, I would suggest, gold. And so it is a complicated commodity, and the difficulty in accessing available capital to advance, even a great rare earth element project has been a challenge for sure. But the permitting, specifically in certain American states, permitting may be an issue. The only real permitting issue across the board is, as I mentioned earlier, the heap leaching, which is done on these ionic clay deposits. And so you're not going to see a heap leach operation happen anywhere, arguably, in the Western world. It's going to be a third world country that has heap leaching, unless it's some kind of a different heap leaching process. Let's put it that way. That's typically only when the permitting issues arise. Certainly there are different permitting regimens or regulations in the United States. Nevada is obviously more hospitable to mining in general than is, let's say, California. But it's not really a permitting issue per se.
Mm-hmm. So, we talked about within the gold sector of grade really being king for the most part, but how are rare earth deposits different in that way? I understand that you're shipping samples of your ore to companies to see how they can best utilize it. So is it just simply based on the chemistry of that ore that determines the best way that these processors can figure out to process it, to refine it?
Yeah, it's basically all about extracting the rare earth elements economically. That's it. And the challenge is with low concentration ratio deposits like rare earth elements. I mean, the highest grade rare earth element deposit out there right now is probably Lynas, and their grade varies between 8 and 10%. Sure, that would be insane if it was a gold project, but if it was an iron ore project, it wouldn't get off the ground. And so with such a significant percentage of, let's call it, unkindly waste, even with Lynas, you're looking at 90% waste. And so it's the ability to extract your target minerals, your rare earth elements, from that 100% of your ore body. And that's really what it all comes down to. However, then, even if you have the world's highest grade rare earth element project, still then what is of equal importance, or maybe greater importance, is the distribution of the deposit itself. How much of the magnet feed does it have? And so, it's the onus for everyone in mining is to prove economic processing, economic extraction and processing of their material. And that is more complicated, I would say, in rare earth elements.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, Chris. Well, I think we've covered a pretty good amount of the gamut there on rare earth elements. Is there anything that you wanted to add there before we wrap up?
Let me just see. I think the thing is that, in general, the opportunity in rare earth elements right now has never been as good as it is. And I mean that across the board. And, companies are at valuations that are an absolute fraction of where they were 10 years ago. And again, to contrast that to the continued increased global demand for rare earth elements, and the fact that there's only one new commercially significant producer, the opportunity for, the next 4 or 5 rare earth element juniors to actually advance into production and to see an incredible, hopeful appreciation of their share price is an opportunity much greater than it was a decade ago. And in general, people could arguably, follow the Oracle of Omaha's mantra better in terms of buy low, sell high. Fundamentally, my company is exponentially more advanced than it is today, and we have a market cap that's less than 10% of what our market cap was a decade ago. Like, that makes no sense at all. And the commodity we're working on, has it been replaced by something else? No. And that's another factor which is really fundamentally important in all of the electric metals. The battery metals, at this point in time, lithium ion batteries are dominating the field. Are they going to finally continue to dominate? Well, there's still so much R&D going on. In terms of rare earth elements, when the prices went ballistic in 2010, 2011, there was about a 6-year period of hard R&D, which basically concluded that there are no substitutes for rare earth elements. And rare earth elements really took off in terms of demand after that point in 2017, et cetera. So you're looking at a commodity where there's continued increased global demand. There's very few, really only one new producer in 10 years, while the market has doubled. So the opportunity now is arguably better than it's ever been.
Excellent, Chris. Why don't you tell our listeners where the best place is to find more information if they would like to?
Oh, absolutely. So commerceresources.com, www.commerceresources.com is my company. My email, my phone number is there. I would look forward to any comments, questions, or suggestions you might have. Thank you, Tom.
Perfect. Thanks for your time today, Chris.
My pleasure. Really good talking to you again. Thank you, Tom.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.